I really appreciate Melissa's focus on this idea of euphemisms, which I teach an urban history class here at Marquette in the honors program, and we spend a lot of time working through euphemisms like the word crisis in urban space. And obviously, the biggest euphemism of the last few years has been this idea of essential workers. And so I wanted to focus my time today talking a little bit about the essential workers that are perhaps most hidden in the shadows and have been not just over the last few years, but have been historically over the last few decades in the United States. And that's, of course, undocumented workers. Today, Latinx workers, and especially undocumented immigrant Latinx workers, are concentrated in the frontline occupations of healthcare, food service, transportation, agriculture, and meat processing. All of those jobs that we have deemed to be essential, right? So according to the most recent estimates, 5.2 million undocumented immigrants work in essential industries. So let's break that down. U.S. Department of Agriculture says that immigrants comprise the overwhelming majority of the estimated 2.7 million farm workers in the U.S., and only about half of those workers have legal documentation in this country. Roughly half of the meatpacking workers in this country are immigrants. Many of those workers are undocumented. 400,000 cleaning staff, 300,000 packers, stockers, and shippers of essential goods, 100,000 home healthcare and personal care aides, and about 29,000 recipients of DACA, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrival program, have been working on the front lines as physicians, residents, nurses, paramedics, or medical students. And as a result of their high rates of exposure in these quote unquote essential jobs, immigrant essential workers and their families have borne a high cost. They're much likely to contract and die from COVID, which then of course contributes to the disproportionate impact of the pandemic on communities of color. Now, because of their status, undocumented workers performing these critical jobs have no access to employer provided healthcare, unemployment, disability, or other safety net programs. I mean, it's like a really cascading problem of issues here. And of course, many of the people who are watching are probably pretty familiar with this. It gets worse though, just to kind of pile on even more. The first stimulus bill that was signed by the previous president not only excluded all undocumented immigrants from relief funds, but it actually denied aid to 1.2 million American citizens simply because they were married to undocumented immigrants. And of course, it would be easy to place a lot of this blame on the previous administration, but as I tell my students, immigration in this country has been a bipartisan consensus over the last few decades. And so this issue continued under the current administration. President Biden's sweeping $2 trillion social policy bill, which passed the Senate last November and stalled out in the Senate, included $700 billion in assistance for working families, including nearly $200 billion in direct payments through tax credits. Now, if Congress would have passed that plan, as many as 4.9 million mixed status families, those include undocumented parents and their US citizen children, would have been completely excluded from support. And as many as 1.6 million American citizen children in the lowest income families, that's 1 in 5 of all children living in poverty, would have missed out on President Biden's push to lift the youngest poor out of poverty. And of course, there's like a double cruelty on top of this, that undocumented workers contribute up to $79 billion in federal taxes every single year and $41 billion in state and local taxes every single year, right? So contributing to the economy through their labor and contributing to the economy through their taxes, and yet not able to reap any of the benefits. And so the pandemic has thrown a bright light on a historical paradox, that of being both essential and quote unquote illegal or undocumented. And as I tell my students, if anybody ever calls you essential, you should run in the opposite direction because something bad's coming at you. The pandemic has revealed a fundamental contradiction of US immigration policy, but it's one that has been at the heart of immigration policy for over 100 years. A critical reliance on immigrant labor, while at the same time we vilify and call for the exclusion of immigrants. This exclusion of undocumented, but also essential workers within the nation, as historian May Nye notes, is, quote, simultaneously a social reality and a legal impossibility, right? People who are barred from citizenship and don't have rights and yet exist in the country. They are, in May Nye's formulation, what we would call impossible subjects. People who cannot be, right? They're not citizens, and they're also a problem that cannot be solved. And the fact that this is an issue that our country has been grappling with for over 100 years. But it's a problem that our country has grown very comfortable with. The historian Natalia Molina refers to this as the enduring disposability of Latinx workers, that we have become very comfortable to call on Latinx workers across the last century to do that work that is essential for our economy, to keep food on our tables, more and more over the last few decades to do that essential care work, but do not include those people in the social fabric of our communities. And I don't know how much time I have left in this section, but I'd like to do in the next section as well, is to cover a little bit about what that means in Wisconsin's history. The fact that over the last 100 years, Mexican descent workers, as well as other Central American workers that have come to the state, have been recruited here to be migrant farm workers, to work in industrial labor. But at every single turn have found it very difficult to actually be included in the larger social fabric of our state, to be included as Wisconsinites, as Milwaukeeans, as members of our community. Thank you.